The market square of Ashbourne smelled of turnips and horse sweat, and the sharp tang of wet straw. It was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were market days, and the whole of the little town poured into the square between the church and the coaching inn. Wooden stalls stood in crooked rows. Chickens complained from wicker cages. A butcher's boy shouted the price of mutton. A woman with a red face argued about the weight of a cabbage. Somewhere a fiddle was being tuned, and somewhere else a baby cried, and above it all the church bell struck 10 with a slow, tired sound. Through the middle of this noise walked a young woman named Maren Thistlewood. She carried a basket over one arm. In the basket sat 2 brown eggs, a small wedge of hard cheese wrapped in cloth, and a bunch of parsley that had cost her a farthing more than she wished to pay. She wore a grey wool dress that had been mended at the elbow, and a bonnet that had once belonged to her mother. Her boots were good boots, but old ones, and the left heel made a small clicking sound when she walked on stone. Maren was 25. She lived above the little bookshop on Bell Lane, where she kept the accounts for her uncle in exchange for the room and 1 hot meal a day. She had no beauty that would stop a man in the street, but she had grey eyes that missed nothing, and hands that were steady, and a way of standing very still when she was thinking. Most people in Ashbourne knew her by sight and did not know her name. This suited her. She liked to watch. She did not like to be watched. She was on her way to the dairy stall when she saw the blind beggar. He was standing near the fountain in the middle of the square. He was tall, taller than most of the men around him, and he stood with one hand on a wooden stick and the other held out just a little from his side, the way blind people did when they were trying to feel the air. His coat was very old. The sleeves were frayed at the wrists. His boots were cracked at the sides. A cloth was tied over his eyes, grey with dust, and his hair was long and dark and needed cutting. He had a beard of about a week's growth. He was perhaps 35, though it was hard to tell. Nobody was helping him. That was the thing that made Maren stop walking. The square was full of people. The square was full of good people, most of them, honest farm folk and shopkeepers she had known since she was small. But the crowd moved around the blind man, the way water moved around a stone. A woman brushed past him and did not look. A boy on an errand ran between him and a stall and did not slow. A gentleman in a fine hat crossed near him, took one glance, and stepped wide. Nobody was cruel. Nobody was kind. He simply was not there, in the way she herself often was not there. Maren adjusted her basket on her arm. She thought about the eggs. She thought about the parsley. She thought that she had 6 errands to run before noon, and that her uncle would want the account book done by supper. Then she walked over to the blind man. "Sir," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. "May I be of help?" The man's head turned slightly toward her voice. He did not smile. He did not speak at once. He seemed to weigh her the way one might weigh a coin in the palm. "I am trying to reach the far side of the square," he said. His voice was low and rough at the edges, the voice of a man who had not spoken much that morning. "The inn on the corner. I am told there is a chair outside where a man may sit." "There is," Maren said. "The Rook and Crown. I will take you there. It is not far, but the ground is not even, and there is a cart in the way just now. You are kind to trouble. It is no trouble." She said it without thinking, and only later did she wonder if it had been quite true. She had been in a hurry. She had wished to buy her milk before the good cream was gone. But she had said no trouble, and now she meant it. She did not take his hand. Something told her he would not like that. Instead, she said, "If you will lay your hand on my arm, just here, at the elbow, I will walk slowly. I will tell you when there is a step, or a stone, or a puddle. Will that do?" "That will do very well." His hand settled on her arm. It was a large hand. The knuckles were rough, but the fingers were long, and the palm, when it brushed for a moment against the wool of her sleeve, was not the palm of a man who had held a plough. She noticed this, and set the noticing aside. Beggars came from all places. A gentleman fallen on hard times was still a man in need of a chair. "Now then," she said, "there is a barrel of apples to our right. We will step around it. 2 paces. Good. Now the ground dips a little. Mind your foot." There, well done. They moved slowly. She spoke in a low, even voice, the way one might speak to a nervous horse. Though it was not a comparison she would have made aloud. She told him about the cobbles, which were slick with the morning's rain. She told him about the boy with the goose, who was coming toward them and would surely swing wide. She told him about the smell of hot bread from the baker's stall, which meant they were passing on the north side, near the church wall. "You know this square well," he said. "I have walked it every Tuesday for 4 years. 4 years is a long time to walk one square. It is not a long time. There are people who have walked it every Tuesday for 40. He almost smiled. She saw the corner of his mouth move, though the cloth over his eyes made it hard to be sure. "You are practical," he said. "I try to be." They passed the fishmonger, who was calling out the price of herring, and did not glance at them. They passed the wool merchant, who was arguing with a farmer about the weight of a fleece. They passed a small girl who was selling posies of violets for a penny, and Maren stopped and bought one, though she had not meant to, and tucked it into the top of her basket. "Violets," the blind man said. "How did you know?" "The smell. Only violets smell like that. You have a good nose. When you cannot see, you have to." She thought about this as they walked on. She thought about how the world must be, when one could not see it. She thought about the dark, and the reaching, and the way strangers must feel like walls. And she thought that she had been unkind, in her way, all these years, not to him, whom she had never met, but to others like him, whom she had walked past without stopping. She would try to do better. She made that small, quiet promise to herself, the way she made most of her promises, without telling anyone. "There is a step here," she said. "Only one. Down, now the pavement in front of the inn. 3 paces. 2. 1. Here is the wall. The chair is just here, to your left, against the wood. Reach out, and you will feel the arm of it." He reached. His hand met the arm of the chair, and he lowered himself onto the seat with the careful slowness of a man who did not entirely trust the world to be where it said it was. He sat for a moment without speaking. Then he lifted his face toward where he judged her voice would be. "I did not ask your name." "Maren Thistlewood, sir. Miss Thistlewood." "Yes, thank you. You are welcome." She was about to step away. The milk stall would already be crowded, when he said, "Will you tell me one more thing?" "If I can. What does the square look like today? On this Tuesday? Not the buildings. I know the buildings. Tell me what you see if you were to stand where you are and look about you." It was a strange question. She almost laughed, but he had asked it in earnest, and something in his voice made her stand still and think. "Well," she said, "the sky is grey but not raining. Just yet. The clouds are moving quickly, so it may clear by noon. There is a woman by the well arguing with her husband about a hen. A very fat hen. He wanted to sell it and she wanted to keep it, and now the hen is on the ground between them, not caring one way or the other. Over by the church steps, 3 old men are sitting on a bench. One of them is asleep. The other 2 are pretending to talk to each other, but they are really watching the girl who sells the violets. Because she has a sweet face. And they are old, and forget that they are old. The baker has put out his 2nd batch of loaves. I can see the steam on the window. And there is a dog. A brown dog with 1 ear up and 1 ear down. He has been following the butcher's boy for an hour, and he has not been paid a scrap yet, but he has hope. The blind man was quiet. Then he said, "That is a very fine picture. It is only a market." "It is not only a market, it is the town." He said it in a way she did not quite understand, but she did not press him. She took a step back, and then another, and she said, "Good day to you, sir. I hope you find your friends soon." "Good day, Miss Thistlewood." She turned and walked away, and by the time she reached the dairy stall she had almost forgotten him. Because the good cream was indeed nearly gone, and she had to bargain hard for the last small jug of it, and she was 3 farthings poorer than she had meant to be when she walked home an hour later, with her basket a little fuller, and her feet a little tired. She did not know that the blind beggar sat in the chair outside the Rook and Crown for another 20 minutes, listening. She did not know that when he finally rose, he did not need the stick. She did not know that he untied the cloth from his eyes in the shadow of the coach-house and folded it into his coat pocket with the care of a man folding a letter. She did not know that his eyes were not blind at all, but a clear and steady grey, and that they watched her small figure move away up Bell Lane until it turned the corner and was gone. His name was Alistair Ravenshaw, and he was the 9th Duke of Marchwood, and he had come to Ashbourne to see what sort of town he owned. The town of Ashbourne sat in a fold of green hills, and every field and lane and rooftop of it belonged, on paper, to him. He had inherited it 4 months earlier, upon the death of his uncle, whom he had not liked. His uncle had been a hard landlord and a colder man, and the reports that reached Marchwood Hall spoke of tenants behind on their rent, of a magistrate who did as he was told, and of a steward who took more than his share. Alistair had read the reports twice through, and then he had put them down, and he had thought for a long time. He was not a man who trusted paper. He had been lied to by paper more than once in his life. He wished to see the town with his own eyes before he decided what to do with it. And so one morning 3 days ago, he had left his coach at an inn 12 miles away, and he had walked into Ashbourne on foot, in a coat that had belonged to one of his gardeners, with a cloth over his eyes and a stick in his hand. He was not proud of the trick, but he had used it before, and it worked, because a beggar was invisible in a way a duke could never be. A beggar heard everything, because nobody troubled to lower their voice around him. A beggar saw everything, because nobody thought he could see it all. In 3 days he had learned a great deal. He had learned that the magistrate, Mr. Coombe, took bribes from a certain miller and pretended not to. He had learned that the vicar was a decent man who visited the poor on Wednesdays and did not speak of it. He had learned that the tavern keeper watered his ale on market days, when strangers passed through. He had learned that a widow named Mrs. Pettifer had lost her cottage last winter to a rent she could not pay, and that no one in the town had helped her, though many had shaken their heads. He had also learned that the people of Ashbourne, on the whole, were neither cruel nor kind. They were busy. They were tired. They kept their eyes on their own doors. Until this morning. This morning, a young woman in a grey dress had stopped in the middle of a busy square and led a blind stranger to a chair. She had not looked around first to see who was watching. She had not made a show. She had spoken to him as though he were a man and not a curiosity. She had described the sky and the dog and the old men on the bench, and she had bought a violet on the way because she liked the smell. Alistair sat in the chair outside the Rook and Crown, and he thought about her for a long time. Then he rose, and he walked, quietly, up Bell Lane. And he stopped at the corner and looked at the small bookshop with the peeling green sign that read Thistlewood and Sons. The Sons were long dead. He had read the parish records the night before. The uncle who kept the shop was one Barnaby Thistlewood, 72 years old, a widower with a bad chest. The niece who lived above the shop was Merran, only daughter of the late Silas Thistlewood, gentleman farmer, who had died in debt when she was 17. Since then she had lived with her uncle. She had no dowry. She had no suitors. She kept the shop's accounts and read the shop's books, and once a year mended the shop's roof herself, because her uncle could not climb a ladder. He stood on the corner for a long moment, and then he turned and walked back down toward the square. That night at the coaching inn where he was staying, in a small private room he had taken under a false name, he sat by the fire and stared at the flames. His man Coswell, who was the only servant he had brought with him, laid out a fresh shirt on the bed and said nothing, because Coswell had been with him 20 years and knew when to say nothing. "Coswell," Alistair said at last, "Your Grace. There is a woman named Merran Thistlewood. She keeps her uncle's bookshop on Bell Lane. I want to know everything about her by tomorrow morning." Quietly, "No one is to know?" I asked. "Yes, Your Grace." And Coswell, "Your Grace. I am not finished being blind." Coswell inclined his head, and did not smile, though something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Very good, Your Grace." The next morning, Merran was in the shop at 7, as she always was. She swept the front step. She wiped the little brass bell above the door. She took down the shutters and set out the tray of penny broadsheets. Her uncle was still upstairs. His cough had been bad in the night, and she had made him drink a hot tisane of thyme and honey at 2 in the morning. And he was sleeping now. And she meant to let him sleep as long as he would. The bell rang at 9:30, and she looked up, and there was the blind man. He stood in the doorway with his stick, the cloth still tied over his eyes, his coat as worn as it had been the day before. He turned his head slowly, listening. "Miss Thistlewood?" "Yes, sir, here, by the counter. I was told this was a bookshop." "It is." "That is a strange place for a blind man to come." "It is." He almost smiled again. She thought he had a mouth that was meant to smile, though it seemed out of practice. "May I sit?" he asked. "Of course. There is a chair by the window, 2 paces to your left. There is a small table beside it, mind." He found the chair and lowered himself into it. He set the stick carefully against the wall. "Miss Thistlewood," he said, "I would like to buy a book." "A book, sir?" "Yes, forgive me. I have a friend," he said, "who reads to me in the evenings. She is fond of poetry. I thought I might bring her a small volume." "Oh, I see." Marin wiped her hands on her apron and came around the counter. The shop was small, 3 walls of shelves, a table piled with second-hand volumes, a corner where a black cat named Mustard sometimes slept. "What sort of poetry?" "I do not know. I have never bought a book of poetry." "May I ask a question, sir?" "You may. Is she a lady who likes soft things, or hard things?" He tilted his head. "What is the difference?" "Some people like poems about flowers and gentle rain. Some people like poems about the sea in a storm, or about knights riding to battle, or about grief. Neither is better. But they are different books." He thought about this. "She likes truth," he said at last. "She would rather hear a hard, true thing than a soft, false one." "Then I have a book for her." She went to the shelf and took down a small green volume. It was worn at the spine. She had read it herself many times. "This is by a man named Cowper," she said. "He wrote about the country, about what he saw. He was a sad man in his life, but his poems are honest, and there is a kind of quiet in them that some people find restful." She put the book into his hand. His fingers closed around it. He ran his thumb along the spine. "How much?" "2 shillings. Is that a fair price?" "It is my price." He almost laughed. He took 2 shillings from his coat pocket. She noticed that he found them without hesitation, and she noticed that she noticed, and set them on the counter. "Miss Thistlewood." "Yes, sir. May I come back tomorrow?" She was silent a moment. "The shop is open every day but Sunday," she said. "You are welcome any day. Thank you." He rose. He took up his stick. He walked to the door, and there he paused. "Miss Thistlewood." "Yes, the dog. The one with the one ear up and the one ear down." "Did the butcher's boy ever throw him a scrap?" She stared at him. She could not think why she was staring. He could not see her staring. But she stared all the same. "Yes," she said slowly. "In the end. A piece of gristle." The dog was very pleased. "Good," he went out. The bell above the door made its small, clean sound. She stood behind the counter for a full minute before she moved. He came back the next day, and the next, and the day after that. On the second visit he bought a small book of essays. On the third he bought nothing, but sat by the window for an hour while she worked on the accounts, and asked her to describe what came in through the door. An old woman with a basket. A boy looking for a penny broadsheet, the vicar himself, who nodded at her, and did not seem to know the blind man in the corner. On the 4th visit he asked her to read to him. "To read to you?" "If you have the time." "A page." "Any page." "I should like to hear your voice at it." She thought about refusing. She thought about how it would look if her uncle came down. Then she thought about how her uncle was sleeping, and about how there was no one in the shop, and about how the blind man had already sat by her window for 4 days, and had done her no harm, and had asked her nothing improper. She took down the little green Cowper. She turned to a page she liked, and she read. Her voice was not trained. It was clear and low. She did not perform. She only read, the way she had read to her father when he was ill, the way she read to her uncle now when his cough was bad in the evenings. When she came to the end of the page, she stopped, and there was a small silence. "Thank you," he said. His voice was very quiet. "You are welcome. Would you read another?" One more. Then I must count the takings. She read another. He listened with his head tilted just a little to one side. She thought, watching him, that a blind man listened the way a sighted man looked, with his whole face. When she had finished, he sat for another moment. Then he rose, and thanked her, and left, and she went back to her ledgers with a strange warm feeling in her chest that she could not name, and did not try to. She did not know that on the 5th day, Alistair Ravenshaw sat in a private parlour at the Rook and Crown with a man in a dusty black coat, and that the man was his solicitor, and that they were speaking of Mrs. Pettifer, the widow who had lost her cottage. She did not know that the Duke gave orders, quietly and without flourish, that the cottage was to be bought back from the miller who had bought it cheaply, and that Mrs. Pettifer was to be moved into it that very week, and that the arrangement was to be made through the vicar, so that no one would know who had paid, and Mrs. Pettifer least of all. She did not know that the miller was to be spoken to about certain other matters. She did not know that on the 6th day the magistrate, Mr. Coombe, received a letter with a heavy seal, requesting his presence at Marchwood Hall on a matter of some urgency. She did not know that Mr. Coombe did not sleep well that night. She did not know any of these things. She only knew that a strange blind man had begun to come into the shop, and that she looked forward to his coming more than she wished to admit, and that her uncle, when he came downstairs on the 7th morning and heard about the visits, frowned into his tea. "A blind beggar," her uncle said, "in our shop, buying books. He is not exactly a beggar, uncle. He pays. With what? With coin. Where does a blind beggar get coin?" I did not ask. Her uncle looked at her over the rim of the cup. Barnaby Thistlewood was a small man with white hair and shrewd eyes. He had run the shop for 50 years, and before that he had run a print shop in London, and he had not lived so long by being a fool. "Marin, yes, uncle. Be careful. I am always careful. Be more careful." "Yes, uncle," that evening. After the shop was shut and her uncle was in his chair by the fire, she stood at the window of her small room above the shop, and she looked down into Bell Lane. And she thought about the blind man. She thought about his hands, which were not the hands of a man who had begged for a living. She thought about his voice, which had the cadence of a man who was used to being listened to. She thought about how he had known that the butcher's boy threw the dog a scrap, though he could not have seen it. She thought about how, on the 3rd visit, when a shelf had fallen and she had cried out in surprise, he had turned toward the sound before it fell, as though he had seen it start to tip. She did not know what to think. She only knew that she felt, in the pit of her stomach, the small cold weight of something not being what it seemed. She said nothing to her uncle. The next morning, when the blind man came in, she did not smile at him as she usually did. She said good morning politely, and she asked what he wished today, and she did not offer to read. He noticed. He noticed everything. He sat by the window for a while, and then he said, "Miss Thistlewood." "Yes, sir. You are unhappy with me today." "I am not unhappy, sir. Something has changed." She was quiet a long moment. She looked at him, at the cloth over his eyes, at the frayed sleeves of his coat, at the way his hands rested on the head of the stick. "Sir," she said, "may I ask you a question?" "You may ask anything." "How long have you been blind?" He did not answer at once. "A long time," he said at last. "And yet you know when a shelf begins to fall." "I hear a great deal. You know when a dog is thrown a scrap in a market square, though you were sitting 20 paces away and could not have heard a piece of gristle land in the dirt." He was very still. "Sir," she said, and her voice was low and quite steady, "I do not know who you are, but I do not think you are blind. And I do not think that is a kind trick to play on a woman who took your arm in a public place and led you across a market square." The room was silent. Somewhere out on Bell Lane a cart rolled past. Mustard the cat jumped down from the shelf where he had been sleeping and walked across the counter with his tail high. Alistair Ravenshaw sat in the chair by the window, and for a long moment he did not move. Then, slowly, he reached up and untied the cloth from his eyes, and folded it, and put it in his pocket. His eyes were grey, clear and grey, and steady and tired. They were not the eyes of a beggar. Merrin felt the blood leave her face. She put one hand on the counter because the counter was solid and the ground beneath her feet had suddenly gone soft. "Who are you?" she said. "My name is Alistair Ravenshaw. I am the Duke of Marchwood." She said nothing. There was nothing to say. The bell above the door made no sound because no one was coming in. Mustard leapt to the floor and vanished behind the counter. Outside, a wren was singing on the sill. "You are the Duke. Yes, you own the town. Yes, you have been coming into my shop for a week. Yes, you let me lead you across the square. Yes, you let me read poetry to you. Yes," she looked at him. Her hands were shaking. She did not know if it was anger or shock or something worse than both. "Get out," she said. "Miss Thistlewood, get out of my shop." She had never in her life spoken to anyone in that tone. She did not know she had that tone in her. But it was there, and it was steady, and it did not shake. He rose. He set the stick against the wall and left it there, and picked up his hat from the small table. "Miss Thistlewood," he said quietly, "will you allow me one thing?" "Not now. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps a week from now. When you are able, I would like to tell you why. I do not care why. You may, in time. I do not care." He inclined his head. "Good day." He went out. The bell rang. The door closed. She stood behind the counter and did not move for a very long time. Her uncle was upstairs, coughing softly. The wren went on singing on the sill. She did not cry. She was not the sort of woman who cried. But she pressed both hands flat against the wood of the counter, and she pressed until the edge of it bit into her palms, and she made herself breathe in and out, until the shaking in her hands had gone. Then she went to the stove and made a pot of tea, because that was what one did, and she carried a cup upstairs to her uncle. And she said nothing at all about what had happened. That night she could not sleep. She lay on her narrow bed and stared at the low ceiling and thought about all the small kindnesses she had shown a blind man over the past week, and about how each of them, now, looked different in her head. She thought about the way she had leaned close to describe the market. She thought about the way she had chosen the cowper for him because she had thought a blind man might like quiet, honest lines. She thought about the way she had read aloud, and how her voice had grown warm at certain passages, and how a duke had sat by her window and listened. She had been made a fool of. That was the truth of it. She had been used as an experiment. She had been a rat in a maze, and he had been the man watching. But then, somewhere deeper in the night, another thought came, and she did not want it to come. But it came all the same. He had listened when she read. He had listened as a man listens. He had not been pretending then. He had come back the next day, and the next, not because he needed to check some report, but because he had wanted to. She rolled onto her side and pressed her face into the pillow. She did not know what to feel. She had never been given so many things to feel at once. The next day was a Tuesday again. Market day. She did not want to go to the square, but there was butter to buy, and the eggs were nearly gone, and her uncle needed a new tin of pipe tobacco. And if she did not go, the errands would not do themselves. She went. She wore her grey dress and her mother's bonnet. She carried her basket over her arm. She walked stiffly, as though the town were watching her, though of course the town was not. The town never watched her. She bought the butter. She bought the eggs. She bought the tobacco. She was walking home along the edge of the square when she saw the girl who sold the violets. The girl was crying, not making a fuss, just standing by her small basket with tears running down her face. She was perhaps 9 years old. Her posies had all been trampled. A boy's boot, or a horse's hoof, had come down on the corner of her basket and crushed every stem. Maren stopped. "What has happened, child?" The girl looked up. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "The flowers, ma'am. All squashed. I only had threepence yet. Ma said not to come home without a shilling." Maren looked at the basket. There was no saving the flowers. The stems were broken. The petals were smashed into the wet wicker. Before she could speak, a shadow fell across the basket. "9 pence for the lot," said a voice. She did not need to look up to know whose voice it was. But she looked up anyway. The Duke of Marchwood stood on the other side of the basket. He was dressed as a gentleman today, a good dark coat, clean boots, no cloth over his eyes. His hair had been cut. His face was clean-shaven. He looked, in fact, exactly like what he was, and it was strange to Maren how she had ever mistaken him for anything else. The girl stared at him with her mouth open. "9 pence, ma'am?" "For all of them," the Duke said. "Squashed and all. But they are ruined. I like them ruined. My horse is fond of violets. He does not mind if they are a little bruised." He held out 9 pennies. The girl took them with a shaking hand. She dropped a curtsy so deep she nearly fell over her own feet, and she caught up her basket, and she ran off down the square shouting for her mother. The Duke did not watch her go. He looked at Maren. "Miss Thistlewood, Your Grace, I did not come to speak to you. I came to buy butter. Your Grace does not buy his own butter. He does today." She said nothing. "May I walk with you?" he asked. "I would rather you did not. 10 paces then to the corner of Bell Lane. After that, I will turn back. You have my word." She was tired. She had been tired since the moment he had untied the cloth from his eyes. She wanted to be home. 10 paces, she said. They walked. The market pressed around them and gave them no space, because it did not know it should. He walked at her side and did not touch her. "Miss Thistlewood," he said, "I owe you an explanation. You owe me nothing. You are the Duke. I am a shop girl. There is no debt." "There is." She did not answer. "I came to this town," he said, "because I did not trust the men who write me reports. My uncle, from whom I inherited it, was not a good landlord. His steward is a worse man. His magistrate takes bribes from a miller. His constables look the other way when Mrs. Pettifer is turned out of her cottage in the snow. I wanted to see it with my own eyes, so you dressed as a beggar. I have done it before, in other places. I have found it useful. A beggar sees a town as it is. A duke sees a town as it wishes to be seen. Very clever. It was not clever. It was necessary. It was still a lie. He was silent a few paces. "Yes," he said. It was. They reached the corner of Bell Lane. She stopped, because he had said 10 paces. "Miss Thistlewood," he said, "when you led me across the square you did not know I was a duke. You did not know I was rich. You did not know I owned the ground you were walking on. You were, so far as you knew, a shop girl helping a blind beggar to a chair. You did not have to do it. Nobody else in that square did it. I watched them not do it for the better part of an hour. That does not make me remarkable. It makes them poor. It makes you what you are. I did not invent it. I only saw it. You did more than see." "Yes, I did more than see. I came back to your shop day after day because I liked the sound of your voice when you were not trying, and I liked how you spoke to a stranger who could give you nothing, and I told myself that I was still gathering information, and I was lying to myself. That is worse in the end than what I did to you." She looked at him. His eyes were as grey as the sky. "Why are you telling me this?" She said, "Because I owe you the truth, even if you take it and throw it back." She stood a long moment. Then she said, "Good day, Your Grace." She turned and walked up Bell Lane, and she did not look back, and he did not follow. He kept his word about the 10 paces. 2 days later a letter came to the shop. It was on plain paper. There was no seal. It was addressed to Miss Maren Thistlewood in a hand she did not know, and it read only, at the top, "Mrs. Pettifer is home again. She does not know who paid. She will not know. I only thought you might wish to know." There was no signature. She stood in the shop with the letter in her hand and read it 3 times. Then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket and went about her work. She did not go to the manor. She did not send him a note. She did not thank him. She did not, in fact, do anything at all, except think, and think, and think. She thought about it while she counted the takings. She thought about it while she made her uncle's tea. She thought about it while she lay in bed at night and listened to the wind in the eaves. Mrs. Pettifer she had known slightly. Mrs. Pettifer had lost her husband to the fever 3 winters ago, and her cottage last winter to a rent she could not pay, and had been living since in a shed behind the vicar's stable, with her 2 thin cats. Maren had brought her a loaf of bread once, when she could spare it, and Mrs. Pettifer had cried, and Maren had gone home ashamed that a single loaf of bread was worth crying over. Now Mrs. Pettifer had her cottage back. The Duke had paid. The Duke had told no one, and the Duke had written to her, Maren, not to boast of it, but only so that she might know. She thought about this for a long time. She was not a fool. She knew that the Duke was courting her, in his strange, roundabout, Duke-like way. She knew that a man who owned a whole county did not pay to have widows moved back into cottages, and then write anonymous notes to shopgirls, unless he wished the shopgirl to think well of him. But she also knew that he had not signed the letter. He had not asked for thanks. He had told her that Mrs. Pettifer would not be told either. It could as easily have been the vicar who wrote the note. He had given her every chance to know without owing. She did not know what to do with this. A week passed. She did not see him. Then 2 weeks. She heard, in the small ways one hears in a small town, that the magistrate Mr. Coombe had been removed to another parish, and that a new magistrate was expected, a serious man of good reputation. She heard that the miller had lost certain contracts. She heard that the steward had been dismissed. She heard that the vicar had been given money to distribute to certain families, quietly, as he judged best. She heard none of this from the Duke. She heard it all from customers who came into the shop and stood by the counter with their broadsheets and their pipes and their gossip. She heard, too, that the Duke was going to hold a small assembly at Marchwood Hall, nothing grand, only a country dance for the neighbourhood, to introduce himself to the local gentry. Invitations were being sent. The shop's better customers had already received theirs. She did not expect one. She got one all the same. It came on a Wednesday. Thick cream paper, a heavy seal, her name written in a careful clerk's hand, Miss Maren Thistlewood, of Thistlewood and Sons, Bell Lane, Ashbourne. She stared at it for a long time. Her uncle, when she showed it to him, was quiet for even longer. "You will not go," he said. "I do not know if I will go. You are the shop girl. He is a duke. There is only one way this ends, and it does not end well for you, I know. Do you?" She looked at her uncle. The old man's hands trembled a little on the arms of his chair. He had loved her father. He had raised her since she was 17. He was not being cruel. He was being afraid, in the way old men are afraid for young women. "I will think about it, uncle, think hard." She thought hard for 3 days. On the 4th day she wrote a note, in her own careful hand, and she sent it up to the hall by the bookshop's boy. The note said only, "Your Grace, I accept your invitation. I shall come alone. Miss Maren Thistlewood." The night of the assembly came clear and cold. There was a small moon over the hills, and the smell of wood smoke drifting from the chimneys of the village. Maren wore a dress that had belonged to her mother, a soft dove-grey silk that had been packed away for 8 years in a cedar chest, and had come out smelling faintly of the wood. She had washed her hair with rosemary water. She had polished her mother's small pearl earrings with a bit of flannel. She wore no other jewels because she had no other jewels. Her uncle would not look at her when she came downstairs. "Uncle, go on then, girl, go on." She kissed the top of his white head. "I will not stay long." Aye, that is what they all say. The Duke had sent a carriage. She had told the boy to say she would walk, and the Duke had ignored her, and the carriage stood at the corner of Bell Lane at 7 o'clock, as though she had ordered it herself. It was small and plain. The driver did not speak. She climbed in and pulled her cloak around her, and the wheels began to move over the cobbles with a low rumbling sound that she felt in her feet. Marchwood Hall was 3 miles out of town, along a road she had never travelled. The carriage went slowly. She watched the hedgerows pass in the small pool of the lamp. She smelled the cold night air and the leather of the seat and, faintly, lavender, as though someone had tucked a sachet under the cushion for her comfort. She wondered if the Duke had thought of that. Then she made herself stop wondering. The house, when they came upon it, was not what she had expected. She had expected something huge and cold. It was large, but not huge. Warm light poured from the tall windows. She could hear the sound of a small string band from within, a violin, a cello, a flute, playing a country reel. The front door stood open. A footman came down to hand her from the carriage. He did not look at her twice. He treated her as though she were a countess. She climbed the stone steps with her heart beating in her throat. She smelled beeswax candles and hothouse flowers and the roast beef from the supper room. She heard the low, happy hum of a room full of people who did not know they were being watched. A butler took her cloak. Another footman announced her. Miss Maren Thistlewood. The room was full but not crowded. Perhaps 30 people, the local gentry, the vicar, 2 or 3 officers in red coats, a scattering of ladies in silks. Heads turned. Not many. Enough she saw a few small frowns, a few small smiles. She saw the wife of the miller who had lost his contracts, stiffen visibly and turn away. Then she saw the Duke. He was standing near the fireplace at the far end of the room, in evening dress, his dark hair brushed back, his grey eyes finding her at once across the space between them. He had been speaking to an older woman in a green gown. He stopped speaking. The older woman kept talking for another second before she noticed. Then she stopped too. He crossed the room to Maren. He did not hurry. He did not dawdle. He walked as a man walks who has made up his mind. Every step took him past someone who had been trying to catch his eye. He passed the wife of a baronet without a nod. He passed the daughter of a colonel without a glance. He walked straight to Maren, who stood alone by the door in her grey silk dress, with her mother's pearl earrings in her ears. He stopped in front of her and inclined his head. Miss Thistlewood, thank you for coming. Your Grace. He offered his arm. She looked at it. She looked at his eyes. She looked around the room, where 30 people were now watching them and pretending not to be. She put her gloved hand on his arm. He turned, with her on his arm, and walked her the length of the room, past the fire, and past the small band, and past the little tables where sherry glasses stood, and he stopped in the middle of the floor, where everyone could see, and he did the thing that made the room go silent. He did not kneel. He did not kiss her hand. He only turned to face the room, and he said, in his low, steady voice that carried well, without ever seeming to be raised, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you the woman who, 3 weeks ago, in the market square of this town, was the only person in the crowd who stopped to help a blind beggar find a chair. Somebody dropped a glass. It rolled without breaking. That beggar was me. The silence in the room deepened. It was the silence of 30 people who could not quite think what their faces should do. The violin held one long, uncertain note, and then stopped. The flute stopped. Even the fire seemed to hold its crackle. Someone at the back drew in a small, sharp breath. Nobody moved. I came to Ashbourne in disguise, the Duke said, because I did not trust what I had been told about it. I wanted to see the town as a stranger sees it. I stayed 3 days. I saw many things. Most of them I will not speak of tonight, but I will tell you this. In 3 days, in a town of 800 souls, one person stopped for me. One person spoke to me as a man, and not a bundle of rags. One person led me across the square and told me about a dog with one ear up and one ear down, because she thought a blind man might like to know what the world looked like. He turned back to Maren. I am not making an announcement of any private kind tonight, he said, and now his voice was quieter, though the room heard every word. That is not mine to make. Miss Thistlewood does not owe me her hand. She does not owe me her friendship. She owes me nothing at all. But I owe her a public thing, before this town, and I mean to pay it. She is a lady of Ashbourne. She has always been one. From this evening on I hope she will be treated as one, whether she wishes to speak to me again or not. He bowed to her. Not a small, courteous nod. A full bow, from the waist, as one bows to a woman of rank. The room went on being silent. Maren stood in the middle of it in her mother's dove grey silk, and she felt every eye in the room on her, and she felt, for the first time in her 25 years, that she was not invisible. She did not blush. She did not smile. She looked at the Duke very steadily, and after a long moment she dropped a curtsy of her own, small and correct. Then she said, in a clear, low voice that only he could quite hear, Your Grace is very generous, but we must speak, you and I, in private, when you are able. I am able now. The string band uncertainly began to play again. Conversations restarted, in careful little bursts. The Duke offered his arm again, and Maren took it, and he led her out of the room through a small door beside the fireplace. The room they came into was a library. It smelled of old leather and beeswax, and the faint smoke of a low fire. 2 green lamps were lit. The tall windows looked out over the dark garden. It was the most beautiful room Maren had ever been in. She was too angry to be beautiful in it. He closed the door. "Speak," he said. She turned to face him. She lifted her chin. "Your Grace," she said, "you have just made me a spectacle. I know. You did not ask me. I know. You have declared before 30 people that I am to be treated as a lady of Ashbourne. Tomorrow every one of those 30 people will have told 2 more. By Sunday my uncle's shop will have a line outside it, and it will not be of readers. It will be of women who wish to inspect the shop girl the Duke has taken up. I will be looked at. I will be talked about. My uncle will be talked about. That poor girl who sells the violets will be told to curtsy to me. I did not ask for any of this." "No, you did not." "Then why?" He did not answer at once. He walked to the fire and stood with his back half turned, looking down into it. The fire moved in his grey eyes. "Because," he said slowly, "if I had come to you privately, in your shop, and told you what I felt, you would have refused me, and you would have been right to. You would have said quite properly that a duke cannot marry a shop girl, and that even if he could, the town would eat her alive, and that you would not put your uncle or yourself through such a thing. I would have said all of that. Yes, so I did the only thing I could think of. I gave the town no choice. I told them, in front of them, who you had been from the beginning. I put the story on the record before the gossip could write its own version. Now the wife of the miller cannot hint that you climbed a duke's ladder. Now the daughter of the colonel cannot pretend she saw you first. The story is fixed. You are the woman who stopped for a blind beggar. That is who you are in this town, from tonight, for the rest of your life. Nothing else can be said about you that does not fall against that fact." She stared at him. "You did it to protect me. I did it because I am selfish," he said. "I did it because I wanted you, and I knew I could not have you unless I first made it possible for a woman of your quality to accept me without losing everything. So I paid, in front of the town, the price a duke can pay. My pride, my privacy, my reputation as a man who does not make speeches. Those were mine to spend. Your good name is not mine to spend. That is why I did not name what I feel. That only you may name, if ever you wish to." She said nothing for a long moment. "Then," she said, "sit down, Your Grace." He looked at her, surprised. "Sit down," she said. "I cannot say what I have to say to a man who is standing over me by the fire looking noble." He almost laughed. He sat. She did not sit. She walked to the tall window and looked out at the dark garden for a long moment, and she felt his eyes on her back, and she did not turn. "Your Grace," she said, "I am angry with you. Yes, I am angry that you played blind in front of me. I do not care that it was necessary for your inquiry. It was cruel. You made me trust a lie. Yes, I am angry that you sat in my shop for days and let me choose books for you and read aloud to you as though you were an ordinary man in trouble, when you were nothing of the kind. Yes, I am angry that you sent me a letter about Mrs. Pettifer without signing it, because it was clever of you, and I do not like being managed cleverly. Yes, I am angry that you have just done what you did in that ballroom, without asking me, in front of half the county. Yes." She turned from the window then and faced him. Her hands were shaking a little at her sides. She did not try to hide it. "But I am not angry that you paid Mrs. Pettifer's rent," she said. "I am not angry that you removed a corrupt magistrate. I am not angry that you gave the vicar money to distribute quietly. I am not angry that you bought a small girl's crushed violets for 9 pence when she had been told not to come home without a shilling. I am not angry that when the shelf began to fall in my shop, you turned toward it before it fell. Because a man who cannot look away from other people's small hurts is, I think, a man who is not entirely lost. He did not move. I do not know," she said, "what to do with a man like you. You do not have to know tonight. I know. I do not need an answer, Miss Thistlewood. I know. I only need to know that you will speak to me again." She looked at him for a long moment. The fire moved on his face. The room smelled of leather and wax and, very faintly, of lavender, which she thought was probably the sachet from the carriage. "I will speak to you again," she said. "Not tomorrow. Not this week. When I am ready. You will come to the shop as any customer comes, and you will buy a book if you wish to, and you will sit by the window if you wish to, and I will read to you if I feel like reading. And we will see what grows from that, and it may grow into something, and it may not. I will not promise, and you will not press. I will not press, and you will not do that thing again, that thing in the ballroom. If ever you have anything to say to me, you will say it to my face, in a small room, with no one else in it. I will. Then we understand each other, Your Grace. We understand each other, Miss Thistlewood." She curtsied. He rose and bowed. She opened the library door herself, and she went back into the great warm hall, and she found the butler and asked, very politely, for her cloak and her carriage, and by 9 o'clock she was home in Bell Lane, standing at her uncle's chair by the fire, telling him in a voice that shook only a little everything that had happened. Her uncle listened with his eyes closed. When she was done, he opened them, and he looked at her. "He is a good man, then," her uncle said, "or a very clever one. I do not know which yet, uncle. Take your time, girl. Take all the time you need. A man who has waited to say a thing rightly will wait a little longer to hear the answer." She kissed the top of his head. That was in April. He came to the shop as she had asked, as any customer comes. He bought books. He sat by the window. He asked her, on the 3rd visit, if she would read a page, and she did. He asked her, on the 5th, if she would walk out with him on the following Sunday afternoon, along the river path, in view of the town, and she said yes. They walked, and they talked, and they disagreed about a great many things, and about a few things they did not disagree at all. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was small. She told him about her father, who had died in debt. He told her he was afraid, sometimes of the size of what he had inherited. She told him she was afraid, sometimes of her uncle's cough in the night. They said none of these things quickly. They said them one small piece at a time, over weeks. In May the town began to be used to them. The wife of the miller stopped turning away. The daughter of the colonel stopped pretending not to see. The girl who sold the violets curtsied every time Marin passed, no matter how many times Marin begged her not to. Mrs. Pettifer, in her cottage, waved from her door, and did not know why the shop girl and the Duke smiled at each other when she waved. In June, on a warm evening in the little walled garden behind Marchwood Hall, with the smell of roses heavy in the air and the sound of a wood dove somewhere in the elms, he stopped beside a stone bench and turned to her. "Miss Thistlewood, Your Grace. I said, once, that I would not press. You did. I have not pressed. You have not. Miss Thistlewood, will you marry me?" She looked at him for a long, slow moment. She looked at his grey eyes, and at the small line between his brows, and at the way his hands were held very still at his sides, because he did not wish this time to be a man who took anything without being given it. She stepped forward. She put her hand on his cheek. It was the first time she had ever touched his face. His skin was warm. He smelled of clean linen and something like cedar, and underneath, the faint mineral smell of a man who had ridden in the sun that afternoon. "Yes," she said. "I will." He closed his eyes for a moment. She felt his breath go out under her hand. He did not kiss her. Not yet. He took her hand from his cheek and pressed it very gently between both of his, and he said, "Thank you." That was all. They were married in September, in the small church in Ashbourne, and half the county came, and the wife of the miller wore her best hat, and the vicar's voice broke once during the service, and Mrs. Pettifer sat in the second pew and cried into a clean handkerchief, and the girl who had sold the violets, now 10 years old, walked ahead of the bride with a basket of fresh, unbroken flowers, and did not cry at all, because she had been given very serious instructions. A year after that, on another Tuesday, market day, Marin stood at a tall window at Marchwood Hall and looked out across the hills toward the town. She was a duchess now. She was still learning what that meant. She had made her mistakes. She had also, quietly, made some things better. There was a new school in Ashbourne, in the room above the old print shop, and she chose the books for it herself. There were coals for every widow in the parish in winter. There was a small fund the vicar managed, of which no one knew the source, and which met the debts of tenants who would otherwise have lost their cottages. Her uncle, whose cough was better now that he lived in a warm, dry room at the Hall, kept the accounts. She still walked into the market square on Tuesdays sometimes, in a plain grey cloak. She was known now, so no one mistook her for anyone she was not. But she stopped still whenever she saw someone standing alone at the edge of a crowd. She had learned that the trick of it was not the stopping. The trick was the not passing. Behind her, in the room, she heard a step. She did not turn. She knew the step. Her husband came and stood behind her at the window. He put one hand lightly on her shoulder. She felt the warmth of it through the wool of her dress. Outside, in the distance, a bell was ringing the hour. "Do you know," he said quietly, "I never did thank you properly." "For what?" "For helping the blind beggar across the market square." She smiled without turning. "You have thanked me." "Not properly." "How would one thank a person properly for such a thing?" He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "One would spend the rest of one's life doing it." She did turn then. She looked up at him. Her grey eyes met his grey eyes. Somewhere in the hall a clock struck the hour after the church bell, half a beat behind, as clocks in old houses do. "That will do," she said. "Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.